In my previous video, I gave an introduction to the series that I have made for The Dark Knight. In this video, I will be providing my review of the film, along with behind the scenes knowledge. With all of this in mind, let's get started with part 1. The Dark Knight starts with the reveal of the Joker, portrayed terrifyingly by Heath Ledger. We get a sense of the Joker's genius as each of his thugs are picked off and betrayed by one another in order to leave him as the last man standing, all according to his plan. At the scene of the crime, we see Batman, played by Christian Bale, and Lieutenant Gordon, performed by Gary Oldman, investigating the mob bank robbery, and they're not concerned with the clown figure, and are dead set on removing organized crime from Gotham for good. In this fight to maintain order in Gotham, they are joined by the new district attorney, Harvey Dent, who is played by Aaron Eckhart, who shares their enthusiasm for justice, and is Gotham's white knight and shining example, the face of the city's bright future and hopes for a better tomorrow. The bank that was robbed was owned by mobsters that take no time worrying about the clown and see the police as a bigger threat. Suddenly, in a stunning entrance and excellent performance by Heath Ledger, the Joker ambushes the gangsters in their private meeting, displaying their lack of preparation for his arrival and his strength as a strategist. He tells them that the only way to go back to the way things were is by going after Batman and killing him. They only later hire the clown to fix their real problem, and they turn to a man they don't fully understand. From here on, the battle of Gotham's soul begins as the Joker wreaks chaos, targeting every figure that stands in his way of his mission to watch the world burn. As the plot progresses, the underestimation of the Joker becomes the downfall of everyone, and what is left from the Joker's mayhem turns everything upside down, creating a world without rules, and what was originally valued by everyone becomes challenged beyond anything they could have anticipated. Further commentary on the plot will be made in further segments. I will now be looking at the information behind the production of the film and the people involved in its creation, and additional information about the 2008 classic. When The Dark Knight came out, it was on a scale and level of intensity that audiences were not familiar with. Before The Dark Knight, there was the first installment to Christopher Nolan's Batman series, which I will make a review on one day. But before that, superhero movies were not as cool and definitely had a lot of work to prove that it could be an influential source of storytelling, adapting comic books to the big screen. Now, it has become a bit of a cliche for superhero movies to be the dominant source of entertainment. But this was arguably the main reason why the superhero comic book adaptation trend took off, which is still seen at the time of recording this video. The Dark Knight was the sequel to the 2005 movie Batman Begins, which was met with great critical success, which was also a surprise because Nolan was a relatively unknown director, with films like Memento and Insomnia being the only official releases he had made. After Batman Begins, Nolan had directed a movie about rival magicians called The Prestige, which was of high critical reception with a box office that returned a profit. The opening bank heist scene was premiered for Will Smith's I Am Legend, and people were introduced to a new type of Joker. Inspirations within Batman comics like Arkham Asylum and The Killing Joke were apparent to those who had been comic book readers prior to the release of the movie, and was a version that had yet to be displayed to a general audience. When The Dark Knight had officially come out, it had broken multiple box office records, including the first superhero movie to break $1 billion, making it one of the highest grossing films at that time. To say that The Dark Knight was influential would be an understatement. It changed how people saw superhero movies and how they were perceived. No longer would a comic book movie be restricted to the page's influence, but could be excellent cinema that would be genre defining for non-comic book movies to come. At this point, I will be discussing the cast and crew and will be revealing minor spoilers throughout the film. As previously described earlier, Christopher Nolan was the director of the first installment of the Christian Bale Batman Dark Knight trilogy, and had at this point been recognized as a competent director considering his portfolio to this point. Although the sequel was being planned from the beginning, Nolan was unsure he wanted to be at the helm for the next project, but he wanted to see his vision of the Joker on the big screen, so he agreed to lead production. One of the main influences for the character of the Joker was Alex DeLarge from the Stanley Kubrick film A Clockwork Orange, which is apparent when you compare the chaotic, psychotic, and sociopathic natures of the two side by side. This is not the only influence that Kubrick has had on Nolan, with Christopher explaining the importance of 2001: A Space Odyssey as one of the greatest influences on him as an artist, and inspiring him to get into directing film. He also supposedly had specific actors in mind for the new characters that would be introduced in his film, like Heath Ledger as the Joker, based on his performance in Brokeback Mountain, and Aaron Eckhart as Harvey Dent, after starring in the film Thank You for Smoking. For this film, he had David S. Goyer, who had wrote Batman Begins along with other films like Constantine and Blade, co-write the film with his brother, Jonathan Nolan. And for the producer, he hired his returning partner and wife, Emma Thomas. Christian Bale returned for his role as Batman for the sequel, after being cast and starring in Batman Begins. For the first film, one of the issues that they had with the costume was the stiff neck that the cowl had given him, not allowing him to be flexible for the action scenes. They had come up with a new design in order to give the neck more movement, and when trying to write the change in the plot, they had eventually decided that the best reason for Bruce Wayne modifying Batman's costume was for the same reason Christian Bale wanted it to change, which was apparently something they originally hadn't considered. For the new district attorney, Nolan wanted Aaron Eckhart for the role based on his performance as the cigarettes and tobacco lobbyist Nick Naylor in the 2005 independent movie Thank You for Smoking. When Eckhart came to the role of Dent, he used Robert Kennedy as inspiration for the White Knight of Gotham, who also used his campaign to fight against crime for a safer and more optimistic future. The motion capture technology that was used in the latter part of the film was considered incredibly influential and still holds up today, marking this film as innovative with the use of computer-generated images and special effects. Maggie Gyllenhaal is also a new cast member within the franchise as the love interest between Harvey Dent, the man who she is seeing at the beginning of this film, and Bruce Wayne, with them sharing a romance in the first film to postpone their relationship until Gotham doesn't need Batman anymore. As for the character of Rachel Dawes, Gyllenhaal is the recast in replacement for Katie Holmes, who due to scheduling differences opted out for production, in which Maggie came into the project because of Nolan's faculty as a director. It's now time to talk about the music of The Dark Knight, and what helps support the high tension and emotions of this film. The music was written by Hans Zimmer, whose music portfolio is extremely diverse, from films like Gladiator, The Lion King, The Prince of Egypt, The Da Vinci Code, and so many others. As for the music compositions, the score was composed with both a live orchestra led by James Newton Howard, and the other half of the soundtrack was created through computer synthesization. Nathan Crowley returns as Nolan's production designer, as he had just finished working with him for The Prestige, and has helped with both Insomnia and Batman Begins, along with multiple Nolan films going forward. You can see how Nathan Crowley is Nolan's right-hand man, serving as almost a Leon Vitali to Nolan's Kubrick, and has helped establish Chris's vision over the years. He was also the art director for Braveheart, was a junior set designer for Hook, and in a Wired magazine article, he talked about his involvement as a second unit on Francis Ford Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula. As a side note, and of interesting trivia as found on IMDb, Nathan Crowley is related to the infamous occultist Aleister Crowley, the man who called himself the Beast 666 in reference to the Bible's Revelation 13, whose influences are scattered across popular culture, with the Beatles, Led Zeppelin, David Bowie, Ozzy Osbourne, and many other influential artists promoting his "Do What Thy Will" message, along with being acquainted with notable figures such as JPL's/NASA's Jack Parsons, which you can learn about in a song by the band Claypool Lennon Delirium called Blood and Rockets, Movement 1, Saga of Jack Parsons, and Movement 2, To the Moon. On a side note about the band, Sean Lennon of the Claypool Lennon Delirium is the son of John Lennon and Yoko Ono, who obviously took an influence from his father. Among the influences for Crowley were Friedrich Nietzsche, H.P. Blavatsky, and a headlong fascination into the occult and theosophy, similarly to the Nazi Party and their leader, Adolf Hitler. Finally, I have decided to save Heath Ledger for last because of the significance he had to the picture and the impact he had made on the people who had came to recognize his abilities as a performer. Heath Ledger's career was fascinating, co-starring with Mel Gibson in The Patriot, supporting actor to Matt Damon in The Brothers Grimm, and starring in films like The Order. Ledger was already on track to being a superstar. The Dark Knight was going to seem like a once-in-a-lifetime performance to establish himself as not just a good actor, but as a method-acting chameleon within the dramatic world that could transform himself into anyone who he wanted to be, giving him the star power and influence for any role he chose. This Australian-born thespian came to Hollywood to make himself a success and worked his way up to the top, and The Dark Knight would be his magnum opus. When he was given the role of the Joker, he locked himself in a hotel room for a month and had found the persona of the clown Prince of Crime. His inspirations varied, with sources like Hannibal Lecter from The Silence of the Lambs, Sid Vicious of the Sex Pistols, Alex DeLarge from Kubrick's A Clockwork Orange, and the musician Tom Waits, who portrayed the devil in the Imaginarium of Dr. Parnassus, Ledger's final film. He kept a journal with him to get into the role that he would stay in on set, going deep and staying in character in order to let his inspired persona take hold of his performance. As for the filming, Ledger would apply his own makeup and would incorporate the need to lick his prosthetic lips and scars to keep them from falling off, making him flicker his tongue like a serpent and giving him a devilish demeanor. The hospital scene is believed to be totally improvised in reaction to potential technological malfunctioning to the explosives. But although there are sources that say that this was the plan from the beginning, Heath kept character not only then, but when he got on the bus, there was a camera capturing his performance, keeping his eyes away from the explosion and not looking back in the disconnected and deranged eccentricity of the Joker. It would be a lie to say that Heath Ledger did not execute his stunning role masterfully, and over 10 years later is still seen as a character performance that inspires recognition when it comes to method acting. Tragically, as the end of production came for the Batman film, and as he was in the middle of production for the Imaginarium of Dr. Parnassus, Heath Ledger died of an overdose of sleeping medication and a plethora of other drugs that the actor had been consuming, from oxycodone, hydrocodone, diazepam, alprazolam, and doxylamine. This shocked the world, and till this day, people still have questions on how this actor had his life abruptly ended, with so much potential still ahead of him, being only 28 years old, and the world fixated on his charismatic personality. During the 2009 Oscars, Ledger's parents and sister came up to accept his posthumous award, and for the Golden Globes, Nolan accepted on behalf of Ledger and the cast who shared the experience of working with him. With all of this being said, it is important to say that the industry must have taken a toll on Ledger, whether that was the stresses of exposure to so many people and being self-conscious about how the world perceived him, the measures he took to get into character, and obsessing in concentration for this role, and being possessed by the chaotic entity that may have also had a tremendous part in how he perceived the world from there on, and the dependency on drugs, to which no one will really understand how this may have shaped his mind and actions. With Heath Ledger's death, people felt an emotional connection to the film and has not only solidified him within the collective consciousness of American culture, but the story also struck a chord with so many people in part with this tragedy. The Dark Knight is layered, and going forward I find it of great importance to try to represent accurately the themes, messages, and symbolism. If we are to look at art as a reflection of the artists, and how we enjoy or despise said art as a representation of ourselves, analysis is key in this process. And I hope you find this to be informative and insightful. As far as my own perceptions, this film at a time did affect me greatly, and there is still an emotional resonance for the story of Batman and the Joker based on my own experiences. As time has changed, my perceptions have also changed on this movie, which is to say that over time I noticed ideas that I hadn't noticed before, and like an ocean, the deeper I went exploring, the darker it got, which is ultimately the movie's message, with the idea of truth and revelation being integral to the plot. This marks the conclusion of the first part of my Dark Knight review, and from here on, we will be looking at the film in a more in-depth view that hopefully many of you will find interesting and insightful.